the Ilkhans will identify mostly with a province in northwestern Iran, and we'll talk about that later, especially when we get to the Safavids, and that's Azerbaijan. Now, let me see if I can abbreviate some of this because I don't want to give you too much. As long as revenue is forthcoming, the Mongols will rarely interfere with their Jewish, Christian, and Muslim subjects. In other words, as long as the taxes are being paid, the Mongols rarely interfere with Jews, Christians, and Muslims living under their rule. However, the Mongols will live pretty much under their own law, not the Sharia. And Mongol law is referred to as a yasa. That's Mongol tribal law. Okay? Now, in much of the Ilkhanate, yasa, Mongol tribal law. Now, in much of the Ilkhanate, traditional patterns of government will have to be resurrected. In much of the Ilkhanate, traditional patterns of government will have to be resurrected for the sedentary population. In much of the Ilkhanate, traditional patterns of government will have to be resurrected for the sedentary population to provide the necessary revenue, manpower, produce, and luxury commodities. Now, patterns of administration will conform. Patterns of administration will conform to traditional Muslim regimes. Patterns of administration will conform to that of traditional Muslim regimes. But remember that the Mongols themselves still keep their own custom, their own law. That's a yasa. Now, at the apex of power is the Khan. So technically Ilkhans are subject to the great Khan who rules in Mongolia. So technically they're stewards of the great Khan in Mongolia. But over time, they will develop a following of their own. Over time, the Ilkhans will develop a following of their own through emirs. An emir here is a military commander. In Turkic it would be begs, but you don't have to worry about that. Now these military commanders are usually the heads of powerful families. The military commanders, the emirs, their military commanders, will usually be the heads of powerful families, but will also be dependent upon the Khan. They'll also be dependent upon, the Ilkhan. The military commanders are usually the heads of powerful families, but they will be dependent upon the Ilkhan for the allocation of pastures and revenue assignments. Okay, Kenny? You're going to see it over time, and I would say that you're going to begin to see it after the passing of Hulagu. And then you're going to see this, because the Mongols have to find a way in which they can rule with the cooperation of the people. Because after all, the Mongols are going to try to take in revenue, and you don't want to alienate people. You want them to work for you. Otherwise, you don't get your needs met.
Under the Infidale?
At the beginning, yes, at the beginning, and it will shift to the Muslim Ilkhans.
So during that very 40-year period? or
No,
after?
this is after the death of Hulagu in 1265. Okay? Well,
Mongol family?
exactly. You can think of them along those lines. If that's helpful. Yeah, they have military capabilities which are attached to perks that they will get from pasture allocations and revenue and so on.
The Mongols, they still decided, they still living in the earth, the capital,
They're still not going, it's going to, at the beginning, they're going to have that transitional period where they're living their felt tents, you know, but over time, when they're seeing the cities of the Middle East, they're going to move into those areas for the most part, especially in Azerbaijan, which is in a northwest of Iran. And that's going to be very important for Iranian culture, especially when we get to the Sudan. Yeah, and you're going to see that, because as you know, the Ilkhans are short-lived dynasties. No, and that's true even in China, when the Yuan lasted from what falls from 1316 before the Ming actually took them over fully, you know, because they were all cracks in the Mongol edifice before that. And the Mongols there didn't make any real attempt to incorporate Chinese culture. You know, some Mongols don't go out. He was an unusual individual, but that would be a tale for Chinese history, which I'd be more than happy to speak to about another time. These assignments provided the temptation, the assignments that the emirs would get, provided the temptation to bleed the countryside dry, meaning in effect to overtax them, or to secure inalienable possession, meaning that they would take possession of land that could not legally be taken back from them. Now, once again, these groups, these emirs, were military. However, I'm going to tell you something about it. They were usually unfit. They were usually unfit to undertake civil administration, as they lacked the requisite bureaucratic skills to assess and collect revenue. Now you'd say, well, if that's the case, if the emirs didn't have these skills, who did? I'll tell you. These skills are monopolized by urban-based and often hereditary officials. Generally, Iranians who kept important links with the ulama and the bazaars. Is there anyone here who's not familiar with the term bazaar? A bazari is a merchant who sets up shop in a bazaar, kind of like a free mall culture, if you will. And they basically set up stalls, and they basically are merchants. So the skills are monopolized by these guys, because if you look at the ulama and you look at the bazaris, one thing that you know they'll have in common will be the ability to read and write. You don't. We basically become ulama without all that. bizarre. Try having a business without numerical literacy in keeping receipts and accounts. You will be out of business really. Okay? So these are the people that have literacy. And usually people that have literacy will act as officials. Now, it was merchants and officials who serviced the elaborate courts. It was merchants and officials who serviced the elaborate courts, which would soon emerge in the Mongol encampments. These encampments were originally temporary. Now, it was merchants and officials who serviced the elaborate courts, which would soon emerge in the Mongol encampments, which are originally temporary. But the Ilkhans will become fixed over time. Meaning, I'm answering the question, do they keep their nomadic roots? At the beginning, yes. Later on, after the death of Hulagu, no. They're going to become sedentary.